Hey, I have just recorded an episode with Lily, who is the CEO of Resilient. Lily and I have known each other for over 5 years in previous roles that she's been in. I had the pleasure of actually working on developing her as a leader as well. So we've got some background. What's really interesting about what Lily is working on, launching her new startup, Resilient, is she is leaning into, I'd say, an adjacent area of business and organizational behavior that is having massive, what is going to have massive downstream impacts into business outcomes today and definitely tomorrow. So what is Resilient? Why are we talking a lot about change and super adapters and of course resilience and people's ability to cope with change or embrace change? All of that is covered in this episode of The Human Loop with Lily, the CEO of Resilient. The Human Loop podcast, powered by Ethereum. Lily, what's your biggest bugbear in business right now?
Oh, it's a good question. My biggest bugbear, or I like to call it pet peeve in business, and it has been for the past decade, is reactive fixes. So I think that, first of all, there are a massive drain on people and capacity and motivation and engagement, and also the return on them is very, very little when we've tried to impose those when we've actually experienced the problem that I'm trying to solve with Resilient. And it's the reason why I was so sick of having to firefight the same problems to the point where that I just uncovered that the human systems that were required to prevent the problem didn't exist, which is why I decided to go ahead and found Resilient.
Okay, really, really interesting. And I think we'll definitely, I want to explore Resilient, like from founder to founder. I think we're in very similar spaces. And for everyone, all of the audience who are watching and listening, Lily and I know each other. We've worked together, not in the same organization, but for probably we met maybe like 4 years ago when you were at Amdaris. And now we both find ourselves founding businesses that are looking to fix problems in the people space. And I'm interested in, you've talked about, reactive fixes. What are the specific problems that the reactive fixes are patching over?
Yeah. Well, let me give you a very real example. So, and the company, because obviously that's how we work together. When I was at Amdaris, I was leading the commercial function. And it was a huge, huge part of the business, of course, because we were a sales-oriented business. Now, Amdaris worked in the tech consultancy, tech digital transformation space. And our commercial team were frontline. They were absolutely crucial to NPS scores, customer satisfaction, ensuring that the business was focusing on the right elements of the problem that the customers were experiencing. So everything about the commercial function had to be, 90% perfect, if that's at all possible at all times. Now, what I was experiencing is that when I took over the team, we had changed as a business, magnificently so, to the point where we were the type of business where you'd have to think about a solution to a problem in the morning and then test it, validate it, fail, or implement it by the end of the day. There was no room for thinking about it or planning it or, getting it perfect before you tried anything. And the type of teams that we had built before we got to this stage were teams that had all the expertise and were perfect on paper, but were struggling to adapt to that new way of working, right? That constant perpetual change and what it means to absorb that change, recover from it in micro doses so that you can continuously perform at a high capacity, right? And what I found is that I was going into boardroom meetings and I knew intuitively and instinctively what was going on. And it was that people were struggling to adapt to the change that the business was now going on. And even in a year's time, we were magnificently different again as a business. So it was continuous, and it just felt like this massive mountain of how am I going to get my people there without them burning out and without them leaving or disengaging or plummeting in terms of performance without having anything that tells me what those behaviors are required to be and how I'm going to validate that and clarify that within the teams. So I was going into board meetings and I was banging my head against the door and wall, and I was constantly talking about this sort of silent, invisible thing that was going on, which was team dynamics and people dynamics and performance dynamics, which basically rooted down into behavior, right? And I was talking about these behaviors that were either really, really good for the business or were derailing certain strategies that we were trying to achieve. And the response from people that weren't in my head experiencing day to day was, yeah, but that's a bit soft. I mean, not that anyone thinks that performance or behavior is soft. It's not tangible, so you can't see it on a boardroom screen. You can't look at it in numbers or data. So people are like, well, let's just wait and see. And we weren't a wait and see culture. And we weren't let's see what happens. But unfortunately, when you don't have a system that you can measure and track and understand from a numbers perspective, then you can't bring it into question in a boardroom. So I was constantly fighting it. And it became, we saw the results. People were struggling. And I think, if I'm being totally honest, I could have done a better job. I could have helped the business do a better job. And it's taking that responsibility, I suppose, as a leader to try and build something that solves it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It does. And there's also a lot that I want to pick into there. So thank you. And Amdaris was you were with Amdaris and went through, that like massive kind of hyper growth phase. And I love the way you described it as a magnificent business, because I think it really was. And, being able to partner with you as a business through that phase was incredible to observe it externally as well. I'm interested in what you talk about, potential burnout and having to iterate and go really, really fast. There's a really, I've borrowed a concept that actually people, when you look at peak performance, you can take people and teams, I think you can take them up to 85 to 90-ish% of optimal effort, for a period of time. I think that for a long period of time, and I think businesses that are performing really, really well are around there. I think then once you tip over that 95% and you're up towards 95, 100% for a period of time, I think it's the same as being above 8,000 meters on a mountain. You're in the death zone, and you can go up there for an amount of time, but it is borrowed time, and you need to repay that debt with periods of recovery and iterate up and down. And I think my observation from Amdaris and other businesses that I've supported or that go on that hyper growth phase is that, as you describe, it has historically, and we'll talk about resilience in a minute, historically it's been very hard to observe and categorize and quantify those behaviors. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And unfortunately, we've fallen into the trap of talking about culture in a very non-specific manner. And what I mean by that is, if we talk about culture, they are essentially the values or company values or the sort of attitudes or mindsets that we intend for people, right? So they're aspirational. But what we don't do, which I think totally links to what you're saying in terms of why it's so difficult to quantify those behaviors, is because we don't look at company values and then very clearly articulate what sort of behaviors under pressure are required. Because it's all well and dandy for you to list a load of behaviors that people need to adhere to within a business in order to meet the culture. But what happens when they're implementing the 15th change of the day? And what happens when they're really tired and they've got a million things going on at home and they haven't slept well? what happens when you're asking them to go on yet another cycle of failure? Because, what people will know in any sort of hypergrowth environment or a business that moves fast is that you fail fast. Mm-hmm. So, and unfortunately, historically, the way that we've seen failure is that it's almost like a negative drain and we should be ashamed of it, when in fact it's a leading indicator, but that's a whole different topic. So the problem with that is that people aren't clear as to how they should behave when no one's looking and when they're really tired and stressed and just fed up of the constant change. And what that then means in the moment, right? Because we're not perfect, and some personality tests tend to do this, but I don't really agree with personality tests as a whole. But some of them do this where they tell you what you're like under stress and what you're like not under stress, but nothing actually plugs it into day to day. That means that your manager can help you really understand that profile and to understand how you're behaving in the moment, how you're reacting to change, and therefore how you can develop better or manage it and absorb it better.
Yeah, and I think that's just fundamental, I think, as a necessity in the flow of work day to day now and in the future, because as we all know, change is only going to accelerate. The adoption of AI into processes, into workflows, the geopolitical environment, changes in margins, like everything is going faster for managers, for teams. And I think there's a couple of things that are really, really important that I hypothesize we're very aligned on, and that's there's a no-do gap. So people might know what the values are, but they might not be doing them inadvertently in the heat of battle where the rubber hits the road. So you've got that no-do gap, and then the flow of work, like actually real-time feedback when you're performing in the flow of work has been on the too difficult pile for too long.
And I would say that is one of the main drivers, and it's unconscious. It's not because people are lazy or they don't seek the difficult things. It's because it seems like such an impossible task that people just go, well, let's wait and see, or let's hope that it turns out better, or deal with it, or cross that bridge when we come to it. I think that's where the trap is. That's where we really fall down for our people, for the organization, for execution.
Yeah. And those are those patches that you talked about at the very beginning. It's like, right, we see a downstream consequence. I like to think about this like upstream behaviors, downstream outputs and consequences. And we see a downstream consequence and go, oh, that's not great. Let's put a patch on that, whatever that may be, an incentive, some correctional behavior, whatever it might be, when actually the upstream in the flow of work is where we need to be living as leaders to be able to intervene early on and set the right processes. So I would love, I think at this point, it'd be great for you to share a bit about, like, I think we understand the problem. And I think that would resonate with every leader that's listening or watching this episode. What's in your mind? What's part of the solution that you're working on? Yeah,
that's a big question. So let me first start with the research, right? And let me start with what we're finding from enterprise leaders, which is our focus at the moment, and why that is a focus. So the research shows over the past 3 decades that 70% of we started off digging into transformations, but actually it's all well-formulated strategies. And 70% of them fail or don't deliver the value that they were expected to deliver. Now, the reason for that isn't because of technology. And I've said this a million times, and I'll keep saying it over and over until people are bored. Tech is actually now the easy part. Even though we don't understand AI yet, and our understanding of it, even at this stage, is very primitive and it will continuously change, what we're not focusing on is what won't change. And that is the importance of people and their behavior and their capacity to absorb change. So their adaptability, right? So the reason why all these strategies are failing, and I've interviewed dozens and dozens and dozens of transformation specialists, specifically in the people space, they all say that the reason is the people side of it just seems too complex and it's just too dynamic and nuanced for people to be able to really understand it at a higher holistic level, at a strategic level, because naturally what leaders are having to do in order to understand it is to go down in the weeds, which is my own experience as well. In order for me to ever been able to understand the behaviors that were hindering or accelerating our execution and our strategies, was going down deep into the weeds and really understanding what these people are doing day to day and how they're behaving in the moment and what's scaring them, what's really exciting them, etc. So it's really important to note that isn't sentiment and it isn't feedback in terms of this is how I feel, that's really important and mental health is extraordinarily important, but that's not the problem. The problem is adaptability, so capacity to continuously perform and execute through change. And the thesis is that any sustainable growth requires resilient and adaptable teams that can keep performing at a high pace, regardless of what goes on around them. So what we're looking at, and I have to be very careful because we are piloting and I need to make sure that I'm not answering any client identifying information, but what we need to be looking at and what we've come to in terms of our conversations have been looking at how we track that at a strategic, holistic level and how we can feed that up into what the business already measures. So, how do we translate that into tangible data for CEOs, CFOs, COOs that really care about certain metrics and are on the line and hook for certain metrics?
Okay. Interesting. Are you, when you were speaking there, I was thinking about John Adair's action-centered leadership model. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah. And I am at a very high level, but I'm sure you're far more experienced in it.
Cool. I say we did go through this about 4 years ago. No, it's fine. Okay.
I knew you were going to say that, which is why.
So here we go. Because I think actually what you've just described it falls. I think John Adair's action-centered leadership model falls into your thesis quite nicely. So you're probably already using it in some of your algorithms, etc. So basically, John Adair. He's like Yoda of leadership, but like an ageless Yoda. And basically what he talks about is there are 3 concentric circles that you need to be. And if you look down on these 3 concentric circles, look at them then sideways, you're basically spinning plates underneath and you've got task, team and individual. And when you're speaking about adaptability and capacity to continually adapt, my mind went to like battery levels. So we've got these individual cells in the team, and it's like, are we able to measure where these are at on an ongoing basis at an individual capacity level, then at a team level, and then I imagine at an enterprise you can then you can extrapolate that out. But I guess there's different levers you can pull on in terms of the task. So the type of change, the complexity of change, the speed of change. As leaders, we can dial down and dial that up, but we should then only play with that lever if we're aware that the individual's batteries are full up and the team's batteries are full up. So I guess you could look at resilience, capacity and adaptability to resilience as when the team's batteries are low or an individual's battery cells are low, like down to 40%, actually the probability that the task of change will land or repeated task will land drops as well.
Absolutely. You are, yes. Now, there is a nuance to that, and again, it's why it's so important that we are also on a journey of education here, because adaptability, of course, your burnout, the burnout risk of not being adaptable is high. But the burnout, when you get to burnout or energy levels being low, you're already at the outcome, the result, right? So what are the early signals that you can pick up on to start to dig deeper or to be able to intervene in order for you to avoid low energy levels or, disengagement or low motivation or a disconnection to the future of the business, or complete utter burnout, right? And I think that that's why burnout sometimes is just put into this bracket of well-being, and it's not actually looked at from a behavioral lens, because those are the early signals, right? When we talk about adaptability, the reason why it isn't soft is because resilience is a leading indicator of your ability to high perform, and burnout is the outcome of most high performers on the planet, right? It's actually a bigger risk to higher performers than it is to lower performers. So it's really important that the levers that we pull are behavioral, so that you can get there early. And that's the task, right? It's understanding and quantifying behavior, what they are, and then being able to track that.
Great. That's really helpful. So for CEOs, MDs, HR directors, etc., who are watching this episode, I'm trying to put myself in their seat. And Absolutely. The question that's resonating in my head is, Lily, this is great. Like, love to have a conversation with you to understand what those are. But today, what can I do? What can I do in observing some of those behaviors in my teams, etc.? What, without you ruining IP, of course, what are some of those early indicating behaviors that we can give to our audience to say, this would be an interesting place to observe, and then have a chat with Lily?
Yeah. So I've said this to every single one of the enterprise C-suites that we've spoken to. And interestingly enough, the answer that I get is likely, I don't know, or I don't think so. And let me explain what I mean by that. So I hate surveys. Let me just be very, very clear on that. We're all very, very tired of surveys. But I quantify it for them, and I help them envision it. And I say to them, if you were to go and survey even just your leadership today, and you were to ask them to start to list the behaviors that directly drive your company values and culture, how many do you think, what percentage of the responses that you get will be totally aligned and very, very clear on those behaviors? And the response that I get is, I don't know, or very, very little. So, and the reason for that is because we have historically not built culture around behaviors. And unfortunately, culture is behavior. Wherever you have people, and the definition of a company is a group of people, and we all know how important people are to any organization. Whenever you are dealing with humans, you are dealing with a stack of behaviors. Now, specifically, behaviors to look at, or the important to keep an eye on, are, it's not my definition, but I like to, I'll call it the same definition that he calls it. So Stephen Bartlett very famously talks about a people wall theory. And in any business, in any capacity at the moment, whether you're an enterprise, a fast-growing startup, it doesn't matter. The pace of change is so large that you don't have a choice. There's this people wall theory where basically the way that things have always been done, and I want you to picture this, the way that things have always been done is the wall, right? So when things are tough, or when things aren't really stacking up in the way that you'd like it to, which people are asking why a certain thing has been done like that historically, and then they actually go up to the wall and push against it to see whether it stands or not. So it's that pushing against the status quo to basically say, why have we done this in the way that we've always done it? And again, what you're trying to drive out of that is creativity and the ability to think differently around systems and processes when you're absorbing that change, so that you can A, move faster, and B, also micro recover in the process. Another element of resilience is what we don't typically understand it to be. We talk about capacity for resilience a lot, right? Now, what every single behavioral science journal tells you, specifically the Institute of Stress Management, the scientific journal, that's me on a Saturday morning. The first thing they'll tell you is that you have no understanding of how resilient and adaptable your people are unless you truly understand the enactment and the demonstration of it. So capacity without enactment and demonstration is zero. So the enactment is your response in the moment to a specific adversity or change, and the demonstration is your recovery after the fact. And again, they are very closely tied together, and you cannot possibly be resilient in the truer sense of it without you encompassing both of those areas. And the reason why our people burn out is because we just look at capacity, which is typically, are you naturally resilient, or does your certain personality with psychometric tools tell you that you might be resilient in this area? We just haven't done people right. And the behavioral science and the historical research tells us as much, as well as my very, very talented behavioral scientist that has built our science. So, but yes, I'd say, first of all, figure out whether you're aligned to behavior, start there. And if you're not, and you're not sure if you are, then that's what you need to clarify. You need to be very, very clear on what behaviors you need to underpin and direct your company values. And then on the ground, you want to be looking at things like creativity, adaptability, resilience, flexibility.
Great. I love that first exercise, by the way. I think it's a really interesting exercise of like isolating C-suite members, and because you can't let them cheat, can you? Like, no. And I know you were talking about like it's a thought experiment for the enterprises you're talking about, but at a very practical level, I think actually it's a fantastic exercise for every C-suite business to do, and then every C-suite team in a business and every team underneath them to do, to course correct on mission, vision, values, and the behaviors that fall out of those beautiful phrases and words that are, stenciled on the walls and on every piece of marketing, because that alignment is super important. There's that, analogy that, if an airliner takes off at Heathrow and is like, 1 degree off or something, it misses the whole of the USA, let alone landing in New York or something like that. And I think in business, we fall foul of that because life is hard, change is happening very fast. We've got margins, quarterly expectations, shareholders, etc. So that's really important. So that exercise, like, I would advocate anyone to do with their leadership team, because I would struggle to find an organization that at the C-suite they would do that really well the first time. I think they would do it better the second time, and I think reps are really important. And then I love the argument around resilience. Like, capacity is a very small part of it. Completely agree, and it's the recovery. And the way that I was thinking about that contextualizes it, I think, for everyone, is lots of people have Whoop bands, Oura rings, Garmin, etc. And the metric that all of those products are pushing, that is the single most important metric for all of us, is readiness score. Yeah. Like, what is your readiness score today? And there are other, obviously, like phrases around that. But that basically, my Garmin every morning, the two things I care about is my heart rate variability, which is like how quickly does my heart recover from duress. And readiness score is basically how well have I slept versus how much strain I experienced yesterday, and am I prepared today? And I think at a day-to-day lifestyle environment, proactive healthcare and proactive wellness and life longevity and activity, life in our years rather than necessarily just years in our life is really at the forefront for a lot of people that are thinking about this.
No.
And actually, I think what you're talking about is helping businesses catch up from a business environment.
Yeah. And it's a good way of putting it. Catching up is certainly it. I think it's being able to do people right finally, and to really understand your people finally, in terms of, and none of the fluffy stuff. I understand why C-suites, and a lot of them have a certain picture of these things, and it's why we're going on an education journey, because the fluffy stuff are really around personal attachments, right, of the individual. What you want to do is be able to understand what behaviors are going to drive that person in your business, and then be able to maximize on that so that you can ensure that execution risk is constantly monitored, and you're able to, it's less about, to your point, the development of people, more about execution risk, and being able to see that first before it manifests in misdelivery or, dissatisfied customers and disengaged employees.
Yeah, and I think look, I see a similar need in building Ethereum, that actually this is about execution, enterprise value. Ultimately, very far downstream, it's about enterprise value. What can and people, people like soft skill. It's human. It's the human skill set that's going to move the dial, because everyone is going to have access to knowledge. Knowledge is being commoditized through AI, and then then as everyone levels up and super adapts to using faster methods of processing tasks, data, and moving faster as an organization. Yeah, I think we're aligned, and lots of business leaders that I'm talking to are getting that way as well. The single point of failure again is gonna be how well you are setting your people up to succeed within that new environment, and the environment is just leveled up, and it's got harder to perform in. So actually, the people that are going to miss out, the businesses that are going to miss out in enterprise value, market share, are going to be the businesses that aren't leaning into, investing in exploring what tools like Resilient and Ethereum can do.
Yeah, and look, I mean, the way that my advice, if I was sitting with you and I know C-suites on a personal level, and if I was sitting with one of my networks, what I would advise is to stop focusing on skills. There's so much talk about upskilling at the moment, and my concern is that it's overshadowing what's actually important. Upskilling is always going to be there. It's always going to be very important. We're always going to have to develop our people. Put it to bed and leave it there. Instead of thinking about skills and job descriptions and how you're going to move someone from here to there and how that process of getting them over there is going to be completed, etc., start building job identities. Job identities that are made up of behaviors that you would expect from this professional, in order for that professional to be able to take on shifting business needs regardless. Because we never know, right? A 23-year-old might come out with a new technology tomorrow that completely flips AI on its head, or what we understand it to be, and how that then applies to our business and how we utilize it, etc. And that's just a given. That's going to happen at some point. So instead of focusing on how you're going to mobilize people based on skills, shift the understanding of how you're looking and viewing your people, looking at or viewing your people, and then start to look at them through an identity lens, which is that behavioral, that durable behavior that can mean that regardless, you've got the right level of curiosity, the right level of endurance, the right level of commitment, because they're experiencing certain challenges, and therefore they're connected to the vision and mission of the future. So that's that's why I think there needs to be a shift. Of course, our tools are really, important. Otherwise, we won't put our lives on the line to build them, right? And to develop them. But I think that they're part of that shift. And the more I speak to enterprises, the more I realize that their competitors now are not even enterprises, they're startups. It's everyone and every technology, because it's coming for everyone, right? And everyone's in the same boat. So the market is wildly different, which is very exciting for our people if we get it right.
Yeah, completely. I was talking on a panel podcast last year, and there were three. It was a recruitment sector specific podcast, and there were three experts in different areas of the recruitment space. And they were talking about, actually very similar, actually to what you're saying. And the outcome was that the winners are going to be those businesses with people where the people are super adapters.
Yeah.
Not subject matter experts as the prerequisite.
Yes.
But super adapters. How do we get our people to be better adapters and adopters of change, of newness, and then getting really good at that craft faster than everyone else? And I think that's that really interesting point where enterprises have got the cash flow, the investment potential, and the appetite to do that for sure. But they also have red tape and boards to go through and levels of sign off that slows them down. And what I'm seeing is, as you say, your startups, your SMEs, where the governance is less weighty, but they cotton on to there's a market potential to dislodge an enterprise. If they can mobilize their teams to be super adapters, then actually they can capture a massive amount of market.
Yeah, and look, naturally, even unconsciously, because we weren't aware that this was, some of us envisioned it, of course, but we weren't aware of the magnitude, right? So when I was in a tech startup 10 years ago, unconsciously, you're recruiting people who can do multiple different things at once, who can adapt to change faster, who have that grittiness to them, because you just need people that can put their hands everywhere and can change one day to another in terms of what they're doing to just get stuff done. But enterprises have operated this stay in your lane, become an expert, do this for 20 years, and you will stack your career up with qualifications, and therefore you'll become a vice president, a CEO, or whatever, if that's the career trajectory that you want to go down. So then you've got a massive part of the workforce that has spent their entire careers becoming experts, and now they're being told to shift their skills. Okay, of course, you have to modernize and develop, but what they're not being guided through is this entire shift in terms of how they show up at work and what their purpose in work is and what their value in work is, in order for them to then create the value that the organization needs. So that's the reinvention that they're really struggling with. And to your point, they have a million different layers. And it's uncovering a lot of repetition in terms of, because if you think of, you've got an account manager, then a senior account manager, then multiple different layers of that stack up across the business. Now with technology, you can probably, categorize that into one section. And that also means an entirely different responsibility and ability to get through it. So I think enterprises are really struggling, but there's a massive opportunity because of the funding that they have as well, and because of the investment and the market share that they have. The conversations that I'm having is that it's really exciting for them based on the exposure that they have in the market. They're just really struggling to get their people into the right sort of mindset. And the problem with mindset is that it's considered fluffy because we haven't been able to anchor it into anything, right? Because if it's not anchored into what you can then translate into business metrics, then, it's just a nice to have.
Yeah, really, really interesting. And I think the bit that I'm gonna leave the podcast with there, I think we could talk for hours and we will, is that what was the word you used? Reinvention.
Reinvention, yes.
Reinvention, I think, is a really important phrase for people to take away from this. Actually, if you go
Yeah.
back and kind of look through everything we've talked about, it's a reinvention in how we're approaching our people and how we get the most out of our people. I think that's really, really important. Lily, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Thanks, Ben. What a pleasure.